If you were a watcher of English football in the 90s and the early 2000s, you would be used to seeing most teams, even those considered as relegation candidates, to generally have a player in their ranks who would be considered mercurial. Now, mercurial in footballing terms can come in a few different guises, which we will go through, but essentially they were players who every once in a while did something outrageously brilliant, providing fans with moments so good they could only be rivaled by Marquis Smith guest reading the football results live on the BBC.
Tottenham Hotspur postponed, West Ham United 1H.
Some of these greatest moments were provided by kamikaze dribblers, running at and beating defenders anywhere in the opposing half in an all-or-nothing gambit. Some by mad technicians using their instinct, imagination and skill to create something out of nothing. On many levels, the decline of these players seems strange. The pitches are like bowling greens now. Nearly all teams tend to play a passing brand of football out from the back, much more than say 20 years ago. And the level of protection from referees is far higher than it once was. So why, despite all this, have these moments of individual genius ebbed away out of the top levels of the game? Please like and subscribe, as this helps the channel immensely and is really very much appreciated. This is a deep dive into how and why the Maverick has become extinct in the Premier League. To get the ball rolling here, we should perhaps make the definition between the different types of Mavericks themselves, and also establish why these players are different to the players who might be regarded as Mavericks in today's game. Roughly speaking, these players can be divided into three sections: the power dribbler, the kamikaze dribbler, and the mad technician. Now, the power dribbler is still active in the modern game, as they carry many of the attributes which are sought after. They are fantastic athletes with a very high top-end speed. They would run the 100 meters very quickly. Think Thierry Henry, Kylian Mbappe, Gareth Bale or Ronaldo. Power dribblers thrive in open spaces, often pushing the ball past the defender by some distance, exposing them to their raw pace. The kamikaze dribbler is, dare I say, the more exciting kind of dribbler that has fallen away from the modern game. These players do not have supersonic top-end speed, but have great acceleration from a standing start, can change direction effortlessly, and are generally as slippery as a bar of soap. Unlike power dribblers, they probably would not run the 100 meters particularly quickly, and are generally not as effective in other aspects of the game. Also, unlike power dribblers, these players thrive in traffic, where their acceleration and balance can come to the fore, and often did their best work in the middle of the pitch. Think Juninho, Paul Gascoigne, Georgi Kinkladze, or if you want to go further back, Ossie Ardiles and Ricky Villa. Finally, the mad technician wasn't so much a dribbler, but had the capacity to do something outrageous, usually with just a couple of touches. These players also do not have a particularly high top-end speed, but their movement, control, technique and imagination enabled them to produce moments nobody else could match. So when did our kamikaze dribblers and mad technicians start to disappear from the Premier League? And why did this happen? There are multiple factors, many of which are ongoing, but the 11 years between 1996 and 2007 were particularly significant due to two teams and philosophies that rose up to challenge Manchester United over this period and redefine the game as they did so in a number of ways. The first was Arsene Wenger's Arsenal sides from 1996 to 2004. Wenger's Arsenal sides were known for playing with a great amount of flair and providing a superb brand of football, so it's paradoxical to single them out as a team which helped eradicate the finesse of individual talents. However, Wenger's title-winning teams were also heavily predicated on efficiency, raw power and speed. In Wenger's first 3 seasons, he signed Patrick Vieira, Nicolas Anelka, Marc Overmars, Emmanuel Petit, Louis Boamorte, Freddie Ljungberg and Carnu, while letting players such as Paul Merson, Paul Dickov and John Hartson go. It is already well documented the professionalism Wenger instilled in the players when he arrived. While many of the players were technically gifted, they played at tempo, particularly through a midfield that would be slowed down by any attempts at dribbling. Perhaps more significantly, this team introduced a new breed of box-to-box midfielder in Patrick Vieira. Bear in mind, top central midfielders around this time, like Paul Ince, David Batty, Dennis Wise and Brian Robson, tended to be about 5'7" or 5'8". Vieira was 6'4", and while height is by no means everything, it represented a watershed moment in the midfield power game. He was big, strong, rangy, fast, competitive, efficient and technically sound. Vieira helped usher in an era of increased athleticism into central midfield play, with Roy Keane, Steven Gerrard and Michael Essien other examples of top clubs making power midfielders an integral part of their teams. Also, players like Henry and Bergkamp would be making opposite movements for the ball to be played into them. Bergkamp coming shorter to receive the ball to feet, Henry threatening to spin in behind the defence. It was the speed of the pass that was critical in taking advantage of the movement these great players were making. The power, speed and intelligence of the team was key in manoeuvring defences around and would be slowed by someone looking to take players on. Perez, rather like Beckham at Manchester United, very rarely took players on as they were able to generate enough room to play the pass they wanted to. It was all about the end product, which of course stands to reason. This is how De Bruyne, often touted as the Premier League's best modern day player, very much operates. Another significant aspect about these Arsenal sides was how the defending and defenders themselves changed. Adams, Bold and Keown and the famous offside system Arsenal employed was slowly evolving, again replaced with increased athleticism and power. Sol Campbell, Kolo Touré and Ashley Cole were all very quick, strong, superb athletes and agile to boot. It was rare to see these players dive into challenges, often trusting their speed to get them back into position when required. In short, Wenger, for all his philosophy about playing great football, which his teams most certainly did, raised the bar in terms of physicality and speed required to play at the top level. He brought a higher dimension of professionalism to the league that other top teams needed to match in order to compete. While Wenger was redefining the physicality and athleticism required, there was still very much room for mercurial talent, if considered good enough. This started to evolve in the second example here, Jose Mourinho's Chelsea teams from 2004 to 2007. If Wenger had introduced increased speed and athleticism to the game, Mourinho took it to a whole new level. While Wenger still relied on the guile of players like Henry and Bergkamp, Mourinho simply battered the door down with players like Didier Drogba. These Mourinho teams were of course based on increased speed and power, but also took defensive organisation to a new level. A statistic to bear in mind here, only twice in the last 10 years has a team kept 20 or more clean sheets in the Premiership, and also this is generally quite a rare feat. Mourinho's Chelsea teams between 2004 and 2007 kept over 20 clean sheets every single season, including a record 26 in his first season. Also, over those 3 seasons, Chelsea lost a total of just 9 league games, an average of 3 losses per season. The superb Manchester United teams between 2007 and 2010 lost 16 league games. In the last 3 complete seasons, the all-conquering Manchester City have lost 14 league games. Chelsea were not just powerful and efficient going forward, they squeezed the life out of opposition, making space that was already at a premium virtually non-existent. There are 2 players in particular that give us some insight into how instinctive Mavericks were starting to be dispensed with tactically: Frank Lampard and Joe Cole. I'm always a bit standoffish about comparing players directly, but Cole and Lampard had a lot of interesting parallels as they moved from West Ham to Chelsea at similar stages of their careers. They were of the same era and would both be regarded as attacking midfielders. There is not much doubt Cole was considered a brighter talent in his youth. The hype that surrounded him would be remembered by anyone following the game at the time. Cole was more instinctive and creative than Lampard. However, it was Frank Jr. that went on to become one of the English game's great midfielders. This in itself is not an unusual story. Players who are perceived to have less talent regularly supersede those perceived to have more. This story is as old as time. Psychology, work ethic, training, growth, etc. all plays a part in the way things pan out. However, it's not unreasonable to suggest that the game itself shifted on Joe Cole too. The efficiency and discipline of Frank Lampard's play became of greater value, and the profligacy of Cole's maverick nature proved less desirable. And rather appropriately, this was confirmed by the man who was at the forefront of driving these changes, Jose Mourinho himself. On the 6th of August 2003, Cole signed for Chelsea for a fee of $6.6 million by manager at the time, Claudio Ranieri. He went on to play for Chelsea between 2003 and 2010, making 183 appearances, scoring 27 goals. Frank Lampard joined Chelsea from West Ham for $11 million in 2001. Another Ranieri signing, he stayed with the club until 2014, scoring a record 147 goals and making 429 appearances. Lampard was brought in at the same time as Philippe Petit from Arsenal to bolster the central midfield. Cole, on the other hand, was brought in as a direct replacement for Gianfranco Zola, perhaps one of the very best of the instinctive mavericks to grace the English game. Joe Cole did not really catch light when at Chelsea. It would be easy to make the assumption that Cole was not able to replicate anything like what Zola could do, but if you look a little closer, it's more nuanced. Zola himself had joined Chelsea in 1996 and was mostly outstanding. However, by 2000 the tide was starting to turn. A new young and powerful strike pairing of Jimmy Floyd Hasselbaink and Ida Gudjohnsen had arrived at the club, and during the 2000-2001 Premier League season, Zola scored 9 league goals. In the 2001-2002 season, Zola scored just 3 goals, and this period is described in Wikipedia. Zola was limited to infrequent starts and many substitute appearances due to Ranieri's new policy of decreasing the average age of the Chelsea squad, preferring to play the Icelandic youngster Gudjohnsen with Hasselbaink. Now, you might say this was a policy of lowering the average age, but more likely it is a policy of increasing the physical output, and lowering the average age is a byproduct of this. In his final season, Zola did manage 16 goals in all competitions before moving back to his native Italy. Somewhat ironically, this was the highest tally he had achieved during his time as Chelsea. So while you can make the argument with some merit that Cole was not the player Zola was, it was clear that Zola to an extent was becoming pushed to the sides himself. You might say this was age, but also it was noteworthy that the 10 position behind the striker was becoming redundant, or at best redefined. Not able to get a game in the middle of midfield, where the power of Michael Essien, Claude Makélélé, Michael Ballack and of course Frank Lampard were preferred, Cole would be forced to play the majority of his games out wide, although lacked the power-dribbling raw pace of Damien Duff, Gronkjar and Robben. To perhaps make life more complicated for Cole, Mourinho preferred a 4-3-3 formation, with the lightning speed out wide expected to tirelessly work up and down the flank. The demands of modern wide players is assessed in the CIES Football Observatory study, who mention that it is not just about ground covered, but also the bursts of intense running required that counts. Important differences at the level of total distances covered and the speed of runs also exist between positions. Midfielders run the most, 10.6 kilometers per match on average, while centre-backs the least, 9.2 kilometers. Wingers cover the greatest distance, both in terms of high intensity and when sprinting. Cole was left essentially not only without a home, but also without the key attributes that were now required to perform a function for a team at the highest level. Somewhat to his credit, Cole worked under Mourinho, perhaps the ultimate protagonist, in developing himself into a hard-working wide player. Cole said this on the Greatest Game podcast. Chelsea was a nice club before Jose, weren't it? We had lovely players bar. The lads would come and play us and have a nice night out in London. It was a nice football team, and he recognised that, Jose, and said, I want to make these the most horrible bunch to play against, and everyone's going to hate me. The manager spiced it up and we obliged. This was never a natural fit, but Cole made a decent attempt at fulfilling the role while the game was changing in front of his eyes. For enigmas like Cole, the cracks had been appearing for a while, but the wall was well and truly smashed through at the top echelons of the game now. If we assess how quickly change occurred over these 11 years, between 96 and 2007, one could ask, Would someone like Robert Pires have got in those Chelsea lineups? Or even Dennis Bergkamp? They might have well found themselves in the same void as Joe Cole found himself in within that Chelsea setup. Beckham's sale to Real in 2003 is well documented, but the fact that he was replaced with a young Ronaldo suggests that the need for speed out wide was not lost on Ferguson either. But there were other moving parts coming into play, most of it initiated by a huge influx of money. Roman Abramovich's investment in Chelsea opened the floodgates to billionaire overseas investment and TV deals, most notably BT entering the market in 2013. SportsProMedia.com commented on this. The deal changes the competitiveness of English teams at a stroke, consolidating their advantage in the player transfer and salary market, and sets the scene for a triple play battle between Sky and BT in the home phone, broadband and entertainment space. As more money came in, the commercial stakes increased. Incremental gains were continually sought across sports science, diet and physical output. The ramifications of relegation and failure grew as regular managerial sackings became the norm, VAR arrived, and club ownership has become one of the game's major talking points, with clubs requiring and attracting multi-billionaires to make them competitive. Since the end of Mourinho's first stint in England in 2007, power and speed has morphed into a combination of endurance, technical ability, and even more speed, with players able to run at full throttle for over 90 minutes. This diminished the opportunity for creative finesse and flair still further. Now lost within a game full of players so quick, fit, and well drilled, it is simply not considered efficient. This speed factor was assessed by French company CIES, who monitored the average speed of German players over every World Cup as far back as the 1950s. While this is obviously not an absolute reflection of the Premier League itself, it gives an indication as to how the game has progressed at the top levels in terms of speed. There is not necessarily an increase in speed from every World Cup to World Cup. There is, however, a general trend in players' speed levels increasing between 1982 and 2010. The report also noted that while players were moving faster, they also had less time than the average of the 40 years previously. This will come as no real surprise to people, but we can see how in real terms this affects the ability of teams to attack. For example, the Man City 2012-2013 team finished second and had 10% more shots than the treble-winning team of 22-23 10 years later. So while the 22-23 team was markedly better, this is a sign that penetrating increasingly competent and athletic teams was becoming harder. We can also note the changes in players' body shapes in the last 15 years. The improved surfaces have made for passing football and technical football, but rather than encourage maverick play, it has meant quicker, leaner, taller players in general. The power of Mourinho's first Chelsea teams have been upgraded into even more mobile, fitter, very technically sound athletes. A study from the University of Portsmouth, co-authored by Dr. Tom Webb, concludes, modern well-maintained pitches, along with tough new training regimes, have had a major impact on the evolution of footballers' body shapes. They examined how body size, shape and age characteristics had changed for footballers since the 1970s. Findings showed footballers have steadily been getting taller, with an average height increase of a centimetre per decade, but in the most recent decade are now also lighter, nimbler and much more angular. This will be a major reason why stockier players like Paul Gascoigne are no longer seen, while the lighter, faster players like Saka, Rashford and Jude Bellingham have come to the fore. It may be tempting to think someone like Phil Foden, while fleet-footed, is one of the few inventive players remaining that does not possess pure, top-end gazelle-like speed. Just to give some insight here, in the 2019-20 season, he was clocked at 23.1 miles per hour, just 0.1 miles per hour less than the highest recording in the league, who, by the way, was a defender. While this could have just been me, it may not have been so obvious to others that Foden is quite as quick as he actually is, because the majority of players in the league are now extremely fast. And of course, this goes some way to teams cancelling each other out and requiring them at the same time to work each other out. Liverpool's most successful front three of Salah, Mane and Firmino were testament to this. As hard-working and athletic as they were inspirational, they are as well known for the gegenpress as much as anything. Perhaps more crucially, this means that the players' body types have become similar. Whereas 25 years ago, you might have Gianfranco Zola going up against Tony Adams, players tend to be far more evenly distributed in terms of height and weight across the pitch, with less varied skill sets. Tactics and trends in football are always changing, but we do know that pitches will not get worse and the physical demands on players will not decrease. This means that by default, players will need to be capable of certain athletic criteria to make it through the filters that exist in producing top-level footballers. It is very likely that our kamikaze dribblers and mad technicians will continue to be memories from a bygone era. Thank you to all for watching this and for getting to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. There are plenty of others on the playlist which you should be able to find, I hope, easily. And I look forward to catch you on the next one. Thanks again.